funnest dish to cook that kind of comes out best is the gumbo, you know, which is a very famous dish in New Orleans. But I think the way you make a good gumbo is you get creative. You have to don't be concerned so much about the recipe, but just get the base right. And the base is you always start with cooking your meats, whatever it is, whether it's turkey, whether it's ham. Generally speaking, the better gumbos are things that have you know, fat in them. You know, fat really makes everything taste good. So, but you know, all the meats are good. Turkeys and leans, that's good. But the first trick to doing a good gumbo is the pot. You know, generally speaking, I like to cook my gumbos out of cast iron. I just think they distribute the heat best, and they just make the best pots of gumbo. So I would start with cast iron pot, and I'd start first of all with my meats. Usually I'd start with my fatty meats first, and I cook them, brown them, but I'm trying to render them and start to get this fatty deposits in the pot, and browning them and getting this browning on the pot. And I take out my meats as I get them browned, and I'll start with the fattier meats first, and I'll cook them. But I'll use sausages, which are pretty fatty first, hams, and I try to get bones in my gumbo. Bones are very important to getting things tasting good, because in the bones and what comes out of bones when they cook a long time is really what makes the base and the congenialness that gumbo needs to have to get it. You can take the bones out when it's done, but you need to get them in there, ham bones or whatever. So cook those meats first, get that browning first, take those out. Then you got to go with the Trinity, which is onions, bell pepper, some celery, those things, and garlic. And I put the Trinity in first after I get the browning, and it melts. That Trinity will melt all that browning. And I have a spoon that I just gave my spoon away to a guy up in Arkansas that cooks for the honey camp that I do. It's on a slant, it's cut on a slant, so you can scrape the bottom of the pot with a flat thing, because you want to get all that brown residue off and let it be dissolved with the onions in the pan that you cook down. Once your onions, bell pepper and all are translucent and kind of cooked down really pretty good on a low fire with all the fats that you have in there, then you can add your garlic, because all garlic will get hard pretty quick if you don't put it in at the last minute when your onions are just about cooked. Then you can put all your meats back in, and then that's when you start with your broth. And I'll use a chicken broth that you buy from the store. Of course, you can make your own stocks, but that's a lot of work to make your own stock, which I do for seafood with all the shells and all. I'll make a seafood stock. They really come out good. But usually with a gumbo, I just use a chicken stock. Even if I'm using seafood gumbo, I'll use a chicken stock. But I'll use chicken stock and then a half a bottle of wine. And usually the wine is the wine I would drink. If I wouldn't drink it, I won't cook with it. Plenty of people cook with wine that they won't drink, and I think that's a sin. That doesn't make your gumbo good, you know. You gotta have a wine that, you know, you don't mind pouring a glass, then, you know, pouring in there. Some people use a cup of wine. I use at least a half a bottle. Sometimes it's a big pot. I use the whole bottle of wine. It can't hurt. And I put wine in any base that I'll use, you know. And I'll use broth to cover the meat and to cover whatever else I'm cooking with. Usually I love, the most important ingredient in most gumbos that I cook is okra, because I love okra. Plenty of people cook gumbos without okra. I think I could put okra in any gumbo that I actually cook. But the trick to cooking with the okra is once you put all the ingredients in, you just start to cook your gumbo on low. And gumbo's the kind of thing you can cook all day, you know. And you cook those bones too. All the ham meat comes off of the bone. You want to cook it all until you can pull the bones out. There's nothing on it. And you know when your gumbo's getting right, it looks right, it smells right, it just all kind of works together. I'm seasoning towards the end of the gumbo, because usually I use a lot of ham in my gumbo. So if you use a lot of ham, you can over salt things if you put seasoning in, especially salt in the beginning. So I usually tend to put the pepper and the salt at the end. I will use other spices then, but those are things like thyme, which I use a lot of. I'll put those in early on because they help get complex flavor. Even pickling seasonings I'll put in there to really spice up things. But I'm talking about salt and pepper. The salt and pepper I save towards the end because I want to taste what happens when the salt comes out of all of the different meats. I add butter to my gumbo at the end, usually a stick of butter. at the end, gets it really creamy. Do the same thing with my beans. And then the okra I put in at the very last end. Okra and the parsley, because it kind of cooks away to nothing. And I'll chop my okra, and right when the gumbo's almost ready to eat, I throw the okra in at the very end and then shut it off. Check my seasoning, add my cayenne, add my salt, add my okra, and then my parsley at the very end. Ready to serve that, you know. So that's how I make a pot of gumbo. How much ham? Can't have too much ham.